Today on Homeworthy, we're heading to Beacon Hill, one of Boston's most historic and storied neighborhoods, to meet Melissa Fetter, the visionary behind Beacon Hill Books Café. She welcomes us into her beautiful 1800s home, a stunning blend of charm and contemporary flair, and a space filled with art and treasures she's collected over the years.
I want to point out I've got two of these globes which were made by the globe maker, Gilman Jocelyn, who built the building that the bookstore is housed in. And so these would have been made in that building in the mid-1800s.
Just down the street, Melissa has brought another dream to life, Beacon Hill Books Café. Step inside and you're instantly transported, as if wandering into the pages of a storybook or discovering a hidden shop in Europe.
Our logo, which is a squirrel, then came to life in the form of a book that we commissioned about a squirrel named Paige that lives in the bookstore at night and goes to the public garden during the day to read stories, or rather to tell stories that they've read the night before. We also have a place where Paige lives, and you'll see that this is all hand constructed. It's meant to be items that are found items that a squirrel might find and then use in their home. The bed is made out of twigs. The top of the table and the seat are the Bon Maman jam jar tops. One fun thing that I love to point out is the little itty bitty painting over the fireplace is a replica of the Rembrandt that was stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum 30 years ago.
Whimsical and inviting, it's more than a bookstore. It's a neighborhood treasure. Between its cozy nooks, story-filled shelves, and the charm of an afternoon tea, it stands as a true love letter to Boston.
This is my favorite part of the bookstore, and this is what we call our aesthetics room. And everything in here relates to architecture, interior design, landscape, gardening, art history, fashion, and art monographs.
Today, she's welcoming us into both her home and her bookstore, two Boston gems filled with vision, charm, and a touch of wonder. You're watching Homeworthy, where we believe every home has a story.
Hello, welcome Homeworthy. I'm Melissa Fetter. Welcome to my home on Beacon Hill. Hi, I'm Melissa Fetter, and I own and started Beacon Hill Books Café in Beacon Hill in Boston, and we're now sitting in my townhouse, also on Beacon Hill. So I have always loved Beacon Hill. In fact, lived here in a tiny little apartment when I was in my 20s, when my husband was in graduate school in the mid 80s. So it was very fun to come back to Boston, specifically Beacon Hill, where we had lived. And we bought this townhouse, which had been lovingly renovated by the previous owner, but I've had a lot of fun adding layers, wallpapers, and drapery, and just extra flourishes that I think make the space more welcoming. And so it's been a very fun project. It is a building that was constructed in the late 1800s, as were most of the houses on Beacon Hill. It's all brick, it's 5 stories, and it's all very, very vertical. When we moved here, the one piece of exercise equipment we moved with us was a Stairmaster, which was the last thing we needed because we are running up and down the stairs all day long. And you just don't want to be walking out the door and find that you left your keys on the 5th floor and you're exiting on the 1st floor. I have always loved interior design that is, number one, really comfortable. I want it to be visually welcoming. I want you to walk in the room and there's a spot that you're drawn to go sit in. I can't stand rooms that are too stiff and too pure in one period. I think an eclectic look. My husband and I have always loved collecting art, so art has always figured into all of our spaces. As you'll see, I'm crazy about blue and white ceramics from all regions of the world, and so that is a theme that you'll see throughout the house as well. I'm partial to lighter colors. I love blues and beiges and browns. I think they're more livable. Occasionally I will feel that I need to have a shot of color, but I'd rather make that shot of color something that is a pillow or a piece of art rather than an entire sofa. I've had the wonderful opportunity to work on several projects with a friend and designer from Dallas, Texas, whose name is Kathy Kincaid. And she and I have done so many projects together that she can finish my sentences. She knows what my real values are and the look that I want. I always want things to look very elegant, but also very, very much lived in. And Kathy's just been a great partner on that, and she pushes me at times to go outside my comfort zone. And as a result, I think the projects are more dynamic and interesting. We've worked on projects all over the country, so it's kind of fun to think back how there's a thread. All the houses have a consistent look, but they definitely reflect the locale. And I think this house that we're sitting in right now reflects the look of Beacon Hill, the look of Boston, the history of Boston, but with a little bit of a contemporary flair that makes it more fresh and, as I said previously, welcoming. So we are now standing in our living room, and what's interesting is houses from this period often had two fireplaces, and as you can see here, identical, beautiful marble mantles. And I think it's because it was just so darn cold, you know, you needed as many fireplaces as possible for people to gather around. When I bought the house, this section of the room was the living room and that section was the dining room, and I decided that that just wasn't going to do. Most of the time that dining table would sit empty, and so I use this as my dining table when we're entertaining, albeit I can only accommodate 8 people, but I've learned that 8 people around a round, or in this case, octagonal table, is the perfect number for a really good dinner party. So when I'm not having a dinner party, as you can see, I dress the table. I want to point out I've got 2 of these globes which were made by the globe maker, Gilman Jocelyn, who built the building that the bookstore is housed in. And so these would have been made in that building in the mid-1800s. And it's just kind of a fun connection to the building. You'll see throughout my house, I love blue and white. I've had this large vase for many years. And then I've used the plates to display on this mirrored wall. I added the mirrored wall as a way to create more depth in the room. And then you'll see over the mantle here, again, a collection of blue and white. Just love, love, love blue and white. Something else I'm crazy about collecting, and that is creamware. All of these pieces, some go back as far as the 1700s. I just love the simplicity. When it's in white, you can appreciate all of the beautiful articulation, and they're more and more rare because, of course, things that are porcelain that go back to the 1700s have had a hard life, and it's amazing when they're still intact in this day and age. So if you come through here, you'll see the kitchen. This is a really cool feature of this building in that instead of the townhouse going directly back with buildings on both sides, we have an open portion, so it brings in light, and I've always loved this sort of semicircle of a window. So when we bought the house, the kitchen had just been renovated. And so I just sort of added some flourishes that I think make it a little more dynamic. You'll see in the cabinets, the left and right of the stove, I added lighting and I lined the cabinets in wallpaper. Yes, I gave up important storage space, but I love being able to, again, display some of my blue and white collection. I added the lantern, added wallpaper. I think wallpaper, you'll see I use a lot of wallpaper in my home. I think it always just makes a room seem so much cozier. I love the way the previous owner renovated the kitchen. It's a great size island. There's a place for us to be able to sit at the island and eat. I also have a little breakfast table. It's really good space, and I find I stay so busy that I don't do as much cooking here as I would like, but when I do cook here, it's great fun, and I love having all the natural light. Year-round, this kitchen gets beautiful light, and I think that just makes a room so much more inviting. So as we move upstairs to the living area, I want to point out that this is a Syrian inlaid mother of pearl mirror, and it's a good example of integrating things from different cultures that, you know, are not indigenous to Boston, but just add texture and interest to the space. And I've had this mirror in many homes, and it was great fun to be able to bring it to Boston. So now we're going to go upstairs to the living area where my husband and I have respective bathrooms and bedroom and a library. So this is the primary bedroom, and one thing I've learned over the years is that primary bedrooms will often be enormous, and they don't need to be. They can be small and cozy and just be wonderfully, wonderfully comforting at the end of the day. I'm very keen on this room. I love the way we've got the fireplace, the cabinets on either side, the simplicity of the shutters on the windows instead of a lot of fussy fabric. I love the, you know, the original architecture that includes the shutters. If you look this direction, you'll see there's a canopy bed. I'm very keen on canopies. I think it's like a little fort that one would build as a small child. And if you look at the detail, and again, this is where Kathy Kincaid is so brilliant, but if you look at the edging of the canopy, you know, there's a very decorative tape that's been custom colored, and then there's another little fringe that goes along the seam. And then on the center of the canopy, you'll see there's a little rosette in the tape. Everything that Kathy does always has those dressmaker details, and it really makes a difference to the finished product. The other thing Kathy's very clever about is she finds these antique textiles, which are sometimes just remnants of a Turkish tea towel that someone has cut up and then reapplied, putting a trim, and she makes these pillows. And what's always fascinating to me is that if you look at this in the context of this contemporary fabric, it looks as though it was all done at the same time, when in fact, the tea towels probably go back to the early 1800s and the fabric was made last year. This is my bathroom, and when we moved in, it was essentially like this, except that the walls were white, flat white, and we chose to paint it in this custom sort of grayish blue with a high gloss, and it really makes a difference to kind of making the space a little more pizzazzy. The other thing I want to point out is on this wall, you'll see it was just a simple mirror insert on a wall, and we took these bone mirrors and hung them on the mirror, and it elevates the look enormously, and it wasn't expensive. It's just a good little trick. Anyhow, classic clawfoot tub. It's a pretty space. I'm so happy with it. So when I was in my early 20s, and by the way, my love of interior design goes back to when I was a small child, but when I was in my early 20s, I was visiting a beautiful, beautiful home in Santa Barbara, California, in Montecito. And the owner, as we were walking through her beautifully, beautifully appointed home, she said, "A piece of advice for you, young lady, you need to pick a look and you need to start collecting towards that look, so that over the course of your lifetime, you aren't just shedding things, you're building a collection." And so that made a real impression on me. I think it's sometimes hard to stick with one look because we become more sophisticated, we get to see more things as we get older, and our tastes are naturally going to change. But there is a fairly consistent look that I've carried through over the past 35 years in 7 or 8 different houses. And I think the key thing is always go for quality. Better to have an empty spot than buy something that's junky that then becomes permanent, and really wait until you can get the right thing of the right quality. Having said that, I've also learned that sometimes if you've got something that creates the effect, it may not be a priceless antique or a vintage vase, but if it's got the right finish and the right look, you can create the effect. It's the highs and lows in a room that make it interesting. If everything is museum quality, it becomes so stiff and so uninteresting. You want to have different textures and different levels of finish. So this is the library, and I think this is really one of my favorite rooms in the house. Of course, I'm partial to books. That might be one reason. But the proportions are lovely in here. It's a grass cloth on the walls. A trick that Kathy always uses with all of her wallpapers is that she edges all wallpaper in this very small grosgrain ribbon. and it goes around the doorways, the base, and the ceiling molding, and it just makes an enormous difference to make something more finished. I've always loved this screen, which is a French screen, probably from the 1800s. I've had it in 2 previous homes, and it's just kind of fun that it reinvents itself everywhere we go. Yeah, I just think this is a cozy room, a pretty fireplace that is original to the house. And this is that part of the house that in most townhouses on Beacon Hill, there'd be a building adjacent to us, there wouldn't be windows, but this part of the house has the advantage of the sunlight coming in, and it's really a beautiful room at all times of the year. So let's go upstairs, yet another flight of stairs, up to the 4th floor, where we have 2 guest rooms and a roof deck. So follow me. So since my children are grown, all of our bedrooms are now guest rooms. And this is a guest room where I literally took everything from my previous home, which was Dallas, Texas, and brought it here, reinstalled the same wallpaper, I mean obviously new wallpaper, but the same pattern, but reused everything. And I'm a big believer in that we don't need to completely redo things every time we move house. And I've always loved this canopy. If you look at the way the scallop detail goes along the top, the way the interior fabric is related to the exterior, but it's a simpler version. Just lots of great details. And you know, I mentioned my love of blue and white porcelain, but I also have this collection which I'm very, very fond of. It is a Moustier from southern France. I have hundreds of these plates, which I have collected over time, and you'll see a couple of them featured here on the bracket and over the mirror. It's just kind of an unusual color scheme, which I'm quite fond of. And then here is another guest room, just a very sweet bedroom with twin beds. And if you come back and look at this viewpoint, you can see that again, these are called testers, where it's a partial canopy over the top of the bed, and it just makes it more cozy and decorative. So this is the top floor of the townhouse. You can see we've got lots of good natural light coming through with the skylight. I love this room. Again, a little bit of a connection to the bookstore, but this wallpaper is all from Sister Parish Design, and it's been custom colored, and I just love it. I never tire of the pattern. And this is an old Swedish break front that we line the inside of the doors, and there's a TV hidden behind it. Again, you see my blue and white, the massive blue and white plate on the top. It's a theme that runs throughout the house, the blue and white lamps. I'm quite fond of this whole look in here. It's meant to be a little bit inspired as a Moroccan souk with the banquette seating. It's very cozy, very comfortable, and we can fit a lot of people up here to watch a good movie. So on Beacon Hill, it's very special to be able to have a place that you can get outside in privacy of your home. So we really treasure having this roof deck, which when we moved in was just this simple flat floor that you see. And our architect designed this beautiful trellis pattern with all of these planters, so we could bring in all of these boxwood globes. And then an efficient use of space was to create this banquette here for seating, and a dining area for outdoor dining. So when I was conceiving this idea of starting a bookstore in Beacon Hill, I felt that what would make it successful was for it to feel as though customers were walking into my private home. And so as a result, the look of the bookstore and the look of my house are very similar. And there are a lot of antiques, light fixtures, porcelain artwork that I have taken from my home and reappointed in the bookstore. And I think that's what gives the bookstore that extra warmth and finish, is that it's not all things that you would typically see in a retail space. That was carried through with the level of finish on the wood carvings, and everything that we did in the bookstore is comparable to what I would do in my home. And I think that's what makes the space so special, is that it is an extension of my home. It feels very comparable. Okay, so now let's go to my favorite neighborhood bookstore a few blocks away, Beacon Hill Books. You've just arrived at Beacon Hill Books and Café. Excited to show you around. Please come on in. So welcome to the main floor of Beacon Hill Books. As you'll see, it's a 5-story building that the bookstore and cafe occupies in entirety. And this main sales floor, you'll see, has got lots of architectural details and finishes that are not typical of a bookstore. My vision with this bookstore was to really lean into the interior design details and have it feel as though you're coming into my home. So for example, if you look at this mantle that we put in, you'll see there are these beautiful wood carvings. Here we have BHBC for Beacon Hill Books and Cafe. We have the oak leaf. Above the bookcases, we have acorns because our mascot is a squirrel. And so there's just a lot of detail that you would not typically see in a commercial space, but it has been the real success of our brand, is that we leaned into the details. All of the paint, and if you kind of scan around, you see it's this beautiful mix of green and blue, is a Flair and ball color called light blue. And it is used throughout the entire building. We exclusively use Flair and ball paints because they have such a great patina. All of the colors is kind of indeterminate, very soft, and they look beautiful at all times of day. Wonderful features of this old building. It was built in the 1800s. Is we have these wonderful massive windows, which we've made a real effort to keep clear. There's still some products that end up, blocking the view, but it's an important part of the store. You'll look over here, you'll see there's this wallpaper that runs up the stairs, and that is a sister parish wallpaper. All of the fabrics and wallpapers in the building are from Sister Parish Design, which has been a great collaboration. I decided to partner with them because I felt it was a really good brand to align with our brand. It's a woman-owned business, it's privately owned, it's been run by 4 successive women in the Sister Parish line of descendants. And it's just a classic brand, but it's got a little bit of a contemporary hit, and that's part of what we think the brand of Beacon Hill Books is. So as you look through this window, you'll see a beautiful, what's called a guild sign. They're all along Charles Street, and it goes back to a tradition going back centuries, where the sign hanging in front of the business is somehow a 3-dimensional object that represents the business. So I delivered a massive block of mahogany to a wood carver, a French wood carver, who took that and was able to replicate our logo, which is a squirrel sitting on a stack of books. The squirrel then came to life in the form of a book that we commissioned about a squirrel named Paige that lives in the bookstore at night and goes to the public garden during the day to read stories, or rather to tell stories that they've read the night before. And it's a really sweet children's book that has a nice message about belonging and the importance of reading. We also have a place where Paige lives, and you can see down here, usually there's a window in front of it, but if you zoom in, you'll see that this is all hand constructed. It's meant to be items that are found items that a squirrel might find and then use in their home. The bed is made out of twigs. The top of the table and the seat are the Bon Maman jam jar tops. One fun thing that I love to point out is the little itty bitty painting over the fireplace is a replica of the Rembrandt that was stolen from the Isabella Stewart Gardner Museum 30 years ago. So when my husband and I returned to Boston 2019, I decided that it was a great opportunity for me to start a business. And I looked around Beacon Hill, and I was very surprised to find that there was no bookstore because, of course, Boston is such a great literary city. Beacon Hill has had many, many famous authors throughout time who have lived on the hill. Its residents are highly educated, they're big readers, and I thought, it's crazy there's no bookstore here. And so from the get-go, my vision was that I needed to get my hands on one of these 5-story townhouses similar to my home that we're sitting in on Charles Street, which is the main shopping street in Beacon Hill, and that you would wind through the space, up the stairs and into little different nooks and crannies, and it would make the process of shopping feel like you were kind of wandering into Aladdin's cave, and around each corner there was some new surprise that was awaiting you. So that was the concept from the start. I bought the building in 2019, and then of course went blaring into 2020 with plans to do a gut renovation on the building, and then the pandemic hit. The advantage of trying to renovate, a very complicated renovation by the way, in a city that has a lot of strict rules and an architectural commission that's even more strict in Beacon Hill. The advantage of the process moving slowly due to the pandemic was that it gave me time to really think through things and to develop new ideas. And so for example, on the children's floor, one morning, 2 years before we opened, I thought, I need to have a train that runs around above the bookcases in the children's room. Or I need to have a storybook that tells the story of our mascot, and we need to have a little diorama of the squirrel's house. So those ideas, I wouldn't have had the chance to come up with those ideas and implement them if things hadn't been moving so slowly during COVID. So in some ways it was a blessing that I had time to really be creative and implement. Okay, so now we're on the third floor of the bookstore. As I mentioned, this is the fiction floor. And what's really marvelous about this space is you've got this long library table where all of our latest books are displayed, and these wonderful full-length windows, which again go back to the 1800s. And I want to draw your attention again to the wood carving. So not only over the mantle, but if you look around the frieze of the room, you'll see we added all of these triglyphs and then little objects that relate to arts and letters. So if it's a globe, or it's the quill and ink, or it's an artist's palette and brush, all things that relate to arts and letters. This is my favorite part of the bookstore. And this is what we call our aesthetics room. And everything in here relates to architecture, interior design, landscape, gardening, art history, fashion, and art monographs. The paint in here is Farrow and Ball, and this color is called Rectory Red. And I draw your attention to the ceiling, which is wallpapered in a sister parish wallpaper called Serendipity. This is one of the best collections in Boston of interior design books, and you'll see tons of classics and some of the younger, more recently published designers. Persephone Books is a line of books that we carry, unique to Boston, that is an English publisher from Bath, England, that has researched and found books that were written by women mid-century forward that were never published because they weren't deemed worthy because they were women authors. And so she has resurrected these books, and they are fantastic. We sell hundreds of them a week, and they're just great fun. And if you're into interior design, you'll appreciate that while all of the books have this beautiful gray-blue packaging, the end papers are different on every book, and the end papers that they've chosen are either wallpaper patterns or end papers that would have been developed in the period in which the book was written. So that's kind of a fun thing. And also I should point out there are sconces throughout the bookstore between all the bookcases, and these are custom-made lampshades that we had covered in sister parish fabrics. And then another thing that I think really makes this space work, and it would certainly be equally effective in a private home, is the way we have the brass light fixtures, the library lights that go over the bookcases. It just gives everything a little extra glow. I should also point out that all of our signs are hand painted by a classical sign painter with gold leaf. And those are the touches that I think really elevate the space and make it a rich to the eye. One thing I've done in this space is I have brought a lot of things from my personal collection, artwork. These red lanterns that you see hanging were hanging in my home, the sconces, and then these are among my favorite. I have a collection of these, 2 of 4, that are referred to as Rouen pots. They're iron pots. They date back to the late 1700s. These are in remarkably good condition, And I don't think many of my customers even notice it, but it makes me feel good to know that they're here. And again, it elevates the space by integrating these interior design elements that you would typically see in a home rather than in a retail setting. I think my favorite thing about the bookstore is the comment that I receive repeatedly, and that is that it feels like a big, warm hug. I love that because that means that my staff is doing everything they can to make people feel welcomed, that the books are calling out to them. People walk in and they see themselves represented in the titles and the authors that are being sold, and that the space, the feeling of the space, the aroma of our house candle that's burning, the fresh flowers that we always have as you enter, the beautiful light shades of blue from Fair and Ball, all of the great fabrics and wallpaper from Sister Parish Design, all of those things combine to create an atmosphere that's very welcoming, and that's what people respond to. And as a result, it's crazy, but we have hundreds of people lining up every weekend to come into the bookstore because it's become a real Boston destination. Let's go up to the children's floor, part of our brand. And again, please take in the beautiful Sister Parish wallpaper, which I think is just fabulous. And this is a fun detail. We added this window. When we renovated the building, it was a gut renovation, but this was kind of fun to provide this perspective into the interior design space. So this is the official entrance to the children's floor, and during the day, the kids, knocking the knocker and running in and out of these doors. And again, see, look at this beautiful wood carving done by our French wood carver with the pot of ink and the quill. So we won't go through that door, come through the big door. And this is the children's floor, which is meant to remind you of the nursery in Peter Pan or the nursery in Mary Poppins. Beautiful arched bookcases with our iconic acorn at the top. Again, the mantle is beautifully carved. Since it's the children's floor, we have two squirrels sharing books with a little butterfly that's on top of it. We have our Boston alphabet, which we just love, where each letter is a different place in Boston. And these are all done by Sally King McBride, who is a family member who has a business called, a family friend rather, who has a business called The Letter Nest in New York City. This is again Fair and Ball color. You'll see over the door on this side, it says Once Upon a Time. And then you come through here into the other room. So on one side, it's Once Upon a Time, and the other side is Happily Ever After. This is where story time occurs and the kids gather together. We have a bookseller who's in charge of children's programming, and they all nestle together on the floor, and it's just very cozy. It's cozy year-round, but I have to say in the middle of winter when it's super cold outside, there's nothing cozier than being inside Beacon Hill Books. And since we're standing here in August, I didn't highlight the fact that we have fireplaces on every floor, which really adds a lot of atmosphere and charm to the space. One of my favorite stories is that Cindy Crawford, she came into the store, and one of our very dutiful booksellers, as she was ringing up Cindy Crawford's order, had no idea who Cindy was, and she said, "I just love your hair, where do you get it done?" And then after the fact, she realized it was a supermodel, and it was just such a funny moment where I'm sure Cindy Crawford was thinking, she has no idea who I am, and that was probably very freeing for her, but we also got a good laugh out of the fact that she had no idea who she was, and she was asking this woman where she got her hair done as though she were just some, average person off the street. We've had some other characters, but again, we tend to be pretty low-key. Our favorite celebrities are the authors that come by to sign their books. I think the thing that surprised me most about opening the bookstore is the obvious point that social media is incredibly powerful. When we first opened, as often happens, people create their own videos of the store and then they upload them to TikTok or YouTube. And in the first week that we opened, October of 2022, someone posted a video on TikTok of the bookstore which went viral. And that quickly had over 1 million views. And as you all know, the minute something has that many views, it just mushrooms, and I think we're still feeling the wave of that. And now we'll go down to the lower level where our cafe and garden are. Follow me. So the building is situated in a building that was constructed in the mid-1800s. It was the home and workshop of the preeminent globe designer of the day. And I've actually been able to purchase some of the globes. They're collected by museums and libraries and the like, and they're really quite lovely. And this is where it all happened in the mid-1800s. So come on in, we're gonna go down our alley into our cafe. We have a little pocket garden. So I love the little pocket garden that goes with this building, and you'll see we've got a wonderful sail that blocks the sun, and this is one of the best spots in Beacon Hill for breakfast, lunch, or dinner. And I want to point out this black box with the roof and the mirror and back is inspired by something that was created in Victorian England called an auricula theater. An auricula is a type, is I think the Latin term for primrose flowers. And in the day they would construct these and put the little plants on the shelf in the early spring when it was still cold and could get icy to protect the flowers and kind of nurture them along. And so when I was trying to figure out what to put on this back wall, I thought, perfect, an auricula theater. And then we backed it with mirror, which creates a wonderful sense of space when you come out of the cafe and you look into this. The light bounces and it creates additional depth. We added this trellis on this wall here with the two lanterns, and this trellis was originally the lay light in a building on Beacon Hill. The lay light being the upper level where natural light would have come through a skylight, and so we converted it into a trellis for the purposes of adorning this wall and having a surface where we could attach these two big lanterns. So we're now inside the cafe, which is quite small, only seats 16 people. But it's very popular, and I think its size, its limited size is much of its charm. I want to be sure you see the mantle. We've got the fork, knife, and spoon that's been carved by our wonderful wood carver, Laurent Robert. This is a teacup at each end of the fireplace, and every season we change the look of what's on the walls and what's on the tables. And so we're just wrapping up summer, which was our nautical theme. So this is actually a piece that's from my home. I'm sure you all have seen these before. They are dioramas that were made in the 1800s by sailors. And so this is a sailing ship and a little tugboat adjacent to it. The tables, I want to point out, are kind of fun. We always have fresh flowers and one of our little Poldano lamps with a shade, and we change the runner underneath. We always have an interesting napkin ring. Again, this was our summer theme, sort of a Nantucket red and a rope pattern for the napkin ring. And then all of these chargers were handmade by my sister-in-law out in Los Gatos, California. We come up with ideas, and she's really good sport about creating different designs for us for our chargers. On Sunday afternoons, we have a tradition of serving a very traditional formal English tea, and it's become a go-to event for people. Birthday parties, take your best friend out, and it's the traditional thing with the tiered stand that I've collected by going to antique markets in England. Silver stand with scones and tea sandwiches and sweets and a pot of tea. It's very traditional. And so that led us to develop our own brand of tea. And you'll see here they have literary allusions, or at least historical allusions. We have Miss Austen's chamomile. We have Gardener's mint, we have Prime Minister's tea, which is Earl Grey, and it's a wonderful gift, and it's actually really, really good tea, I have to say. And I want to point out, I love the way we design this. It's meant to mimic our building, and you'll see a drawing of the building on the side, so that the tea canister is like a little version of our building. And then the other thing that we sell down here is, since it is the cafe, we sell cookbooks, and I'm always proud of the fact that you'd be hard-pressed to find a region of the world where we have not represented in some way cookbooks from that region. The word home to me is a feeling. Sometimes it's the intangible of just walking into a space and feeling embraced, feeling comfortable. Everything from the level of lighting and candlelight and scented candles and fresh flowers, all of those things are sensory perceptions that really cause us to either be drawn to a space or to want to leave a space. And so I'm always very attuned to that any place can feel like home, no matter how small or large. It's all about the attention to detail. And as a good friend of mine said many years ago, a house needs to be loved. And boy, if that isn't true, we need to constantly be tinkering and adjusting things to assure that it's at its optimal.
Thanks for watching. Be sure to go to homeworthy.com for exclusive content, shopping guides, and so much more.